Okay, so here we are back in part 2 of exercise 2, and we're going to look at our next shape. So let's come in over to shape 2, just close that down a little bit so we can't see that, and lock it up. Right, so let's take a quick look at what shape 3 is going to be doing. Well, shape 3 is fairly interesting. It's rotating around. There's also this little nubbin here, which is coming in. And as well as rotating down, everything is scaling as well. So let's break this down to its into its constituent parts here. And again, we're looking for the simplest shapes that we can possibly make. So we have this shape here, which I think again could be handled best with the Bezier tool. So let's come in and let's just take a quick look at doing this. We've got these little areas here which would be quite tricky to do, or would require quite a few little shapes to do with the X-spline, but I think we can probably handle these quite quickly with the Bezier tool. Alright, so let's turn our overlays back on so we can start to work with it. Another little thing actually is looking at the zoom window down here, which is something I didn't really show before, so we take that off. We've got no zoom window. With that turned on, all of a sudden we have a zoom window, so we can get a bit more accurate with what we're doing. So let's create our new shape. Cool. We're going to need a container for this, so let's come in and let's create a new layer, and we'll call this shape 3. All right, so let's do first things first on this. Let's turn my. Of course, with our shape turned on here, let's come back into our Bezier view, zoom in just a tiny bit again, and I think we can probably take these quite nice and simply. Now, if you can, it's going to be best to try to make these shapes as simple and straightforward as possible. So, when it comes to rotoing humans, for example, I would not be so gung-ho about coming in and breaking the handles, especially if it's going to be something that's animating quite ferociously over time. Simply because it's going to be a bit trickier to get a nice controllable animation when your handles are sort of moving about all over the place. But that is a problem that we're going to be facing in another exercise. Okay, so look what I'm doing here. Just zoom in, zoom out a little bit here. I'm not taking this section here as part of the main shape. Why is that? Well, let's take a quick look back here. We can see that this part of the shape is going to be moving independently to this main shape here. So I'm going to take that out as a separate shape. Come in and we're going to tidy this up a little bit. Let's just quickly do the rest. And I'm just going to use the reshape tool here just to come in and tidy up the mess that I've gotten into with some of this stuff here. That's pretty good for now. Alright, the other thing I'm going to do is come in and name this. I'm going to call this 3, because it's part of shape 3, 3 main octagon. Is it octagon? It's got 8 sides, probably. It's about right. I know what I'm talking about. Octagon. And let's do another shape here for this little ellipse. And let's just take that around about there, and now come into the transform tool, just as we did before actually, and just scale this so that it fits. Cool. All right. And I'm just going to change the name of this to 3 oval, and change the color of this so I can just recognize it. So it's slightly different from the other one. So I'm going to be banging on about the golden rules again here. And we're back to rule number 1, which is do as little work as possible. because let's have a look at what's going on here. Let's turn off the overlays for a moment, just have a little look again. So we can see that the oval is coming in and animating around, but pretty much the main shape is moving consistently. So instead of coming in and animating the octagon and the oval separately, I'm just going to be animating this main shape instead. And we can do that very, very simply. And this is great. So my oval overlay is back on. And I've got this great little heads-up display now showing. And this gives me tons of control over the entire shape layer. So if I want to just move it around, I can just move it around. And that moves everything on my shape layer. If I want to rotate it around, I go to the outer circle here. And that rotates it around my anchor point here. If I want to scale it up and down, I can scale it up and down using the square. And let's just undo that a few times so we get back to where we were. Now the thing that's going to cause us a bit of trouble here is how we're going to, or where we're going to be rotating around. Because at the moment, if I rotate it, it's rotating around this anchor point here. So what I want to do is I want to get this anchor point in the dead center of this entire shape, so that it's going to mean that I have to do far fewer keyframes. So let's zoom in a little bit, and now I can move my anchor point up here. When the cursor changes just to a regular crosshairs, again this this overlay now is white on white, so it's quite tricky to see. Back into my preferences, come down to the viewer, go to layer transform color, and let's change this to a very dark green, or maybe actually a dark orange. Hit apply. Yeah, that's much easier to see. Cool. All right, and let's carry on trying to just line this up a little bit. And it can be tricky to just find the anchor point, even just the anchor point cursor, but a bit of persistence pays off. And we'll grab that around about there. So let's check, zoom out a little bit, and let's check if we're actually anywhere close to being in the right area. So what I'm going to do is let's come over here now to our object, which we haven't really looked at, but this is where we can start to keyframe things up as well, because up to now we've been keyframing directly on the timeline. Over here we can set keyframes for our position, our scale, rotation. Matrix we'll come back to. This is where we can store tracking data, and then overall blend modes and blurs. But if I click on the little stopwatch here on my rotate and scale, I can add a little keyframe here where I know everything's correct. Come over to probably the end frame, because it seems to be moving fairly consistently. And I'm going to well, first thing I'm going to do is scale it down, get us around about in the area, and also rotate it around. Let's rescale a little bit using the heads-up controls. And you can see I'm not quite accurate with the anchor point. If everything was accurate here, this would all be lining up quite nicely. In fact, let's type in 180, because I'm going to guess that's where we were. So we do really need to focus on the anchor point, because if we were to just reposition this, let's do that here just quickly. I can see my scale's off a little bit anyway, but if we were just to reposition this, it wouldn't match accurately, and as we haven't even put in a keyframe on the position anyway, it will have sent the rest of our animation off. So really we do need to focus on the anchor point. So I can come in here and I can just click this up and down just to get us much more in the right area, and then zoom, change the scale here. If the head-up display will let me change the zoom. So if you're finding the the display here a little bit finicky. Again, this is another good point for coming into the preferences over here, changing it from, again we're in the viewer here, change the picking tolerance up slightly. Or we can send it all the way up to 20. I'm going to hit 20 just to show that now it's going to be far easier. It's going to be far easier to be accurate with our scale. We're not quite there yet, but we're pretty much in the right area. Let's just send these to whole numbers, and then that should be cool. So 814 and 184. Yeah, that's pretty much got us in the right area, so that when we now do our rotation here, you can see, if I zoom out just a tiny bit, you can see that we've now got that sussed, and we only have to add in one extra keyframe to do both of the shapes. It also frees us up for when we want to do the transform on the, transforming this oval just here. So let's see where that stops moving. It stops moving around about there. That's the final frame. So I can come into my oval here and just do a transform just on that. And then I've got that fairly complicated shape sussed out with just the minimum amount of keyframes. Let's turn the overlays off, hit play on that. So you can see that really by thinking about what you're doing, you can come in and create some fairly simple, straightforward shapes that you can then transform using the layer properties to take out most of the hard work, most of the heavy lifting. Well, shall we see how that works in a real life situation? I'm going to import some more media. I'm going to import my beetle here. Frame starts at frame 788, but don't let that worry you. So come in, we've got our beetle over here now. Have that selected, go to new session. Beetle, 25 frames a second still. That's all good. Okay. Hit F on this just to fit that in, and let's just play this through. And while this is caching in, I'm just going to guide you down here. This is showing the number of frames that we currently have stored in our cache, so that we can play things through in real time, and the maximum number of frames that we have due to the size of the memory. Now, Silhouette Effects is a 64-bit app, so it is able to use all the memory that you can throw at it. So at the moment I've got 12 gigs in this. I've assigned 6 gig to be the cache, so that gives us 776 HD frames that I can play back in real time. Cool, so let's take a look at this shot. Let's break it down. We've got two different types of movement in this shot. We have the movement of the camera and the movement of the beetle. And it's going to be much better for us to separate out those two so that we have the camera movement being dealt with in one area and the movement of the beetle being dealt with in another area. So this is where the layers really come in. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer down here, and I'm going to call this main beetle. And it's in here that I'm going to start creating my shapes. I've got to be careful again with the shapes because we have a change in perspective on the camera. So what I don't want to do is I don't want to make one big shape for this for the insect and then have to sort of go in and make lots and lots of complicated keyframes for it. Far better to come in and kind of come in with an ellipse tool. Let's turn my overlays on. Come in with an ellipse tool here. Just get something that's fairly rough. Come in with my transform and transform this up using the distort here. So I'm going to get one for the main carapace here. Going to get another one for this little area here because that's probably going to change a little bit too. So come in, come back to my transform there. Again, hold down the Alt key. Make sure we've got some overlap going on. There we go. And do the same for the second part of the body here. It is T to go into our transform, but I'm going to use the button up here just to help us out a little bit. So that's our main body here. So I'm going to call this body main upper. Try and break it down a bit like that. I'll call this body. Try again, body main lower. And body main center. Cool. We can also do stuff for the head, but let's just take these three shapes just for the time being. Cool. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to be coming out to our main beetle here. Let's come into our transform tool, and we're going to be transforming using the layer to begin with. So the layer's there to really sort of help us take out that camera movement and to compensate for that. So again, I'm going to come into my preferences here. I'm going to need to change my layer transform color back up to something a bit brighter. Come back up to white actually. Cool, and let's change the center point round about the center of the insect there. Because we're working with non-uniform shape here, this could be pretty much anywhere. It's just where it's going to help us out the most. I think center of the body is probably going to help us out the most. Cool, come into the transform, and we're going to transform position, scale and rotation. And let's take a look now at this. So what we're going to do is we're going to look for the key frames, the key points where the animation starts to stop. So here we go. So we've got one movement where it comes back and then slows down. So at that point here, I'm going to come in, going to transform up my beetle. I'm going to need to rotate it just slightly, and I could probably scale it a little bit as well. Cool, so that's that will come in, move us through fairly swiftly. So again, all I'm doing is looking for where the camera starts to move out. It's pretty good up until around about there where things start to go a little bit awry, and that's mainly because I've keyframed my position in several places, but I haven't added keyframes for the scale and rotation here as well. So when it starts to keyframe with a rotation, we've got this rotation going on all the way over here. So what I want to do is just take this keyframe here, which I know is good, copy that keyframe there by right clicking on it, and then paste that back in there, and that will match up a bit better for the rest of the shot. Okay, so now I've got the main movement going in. Just going to come in and tidy this up a little bit. We've got quite a wild camera going on, so there is going to be a bit of tidying. And every single point, what I'm doing is I'm looking for the frame where it goes out the most. And then come in, I'm going to copy this keyframe, paste it to the side of my other keyframe because I don't want to mess everything up there. This handheld camera is giving us quite a wild ride. But the cool thing is, actually, we're having to do far less work than you might otherwise think, simply because instead of keyframing the points up here, we're keyframing the entire shape of the bug. Cool. Let's leave it around about frame 34, and let's come into the individual shapes here to see if we need to do anything there. Actually, that is a bit much. That's still a camera thing. So that's not great. We'll move that out of the way. Cool. Now the nice thing is, now we've done some transforms on our layer here, we have a new button that's lit up, and that's our stabilize button. So if I hit stabilize now, what's going to happen is it's going to stabilize our footage around our layer here, so we can see where things are still going a bit awry, like there. Probably best not to try to reposition with the stabilize turned on. So let's turn the stabilize off. And let's get that out there. Alright, now the really cool thing about this here is that we can come in and we can see the individual shapes that might need changing up. So for example, here where the camera angle is beginning to shift, actually, so you see this front piece here, body main upper, needs to be transformed a little bit. So we can come in and we can transform just that one little piece. So the areas where it's changing because of the camera, we change the main shape layer. The area where it's changing because of the change of perspective or because of any movement, for example, this bit here, this is where we could change it on the individual shapes here. We've actually gone through quite a lot in just this second exercise. We've gone through in the first part, we've gone through the major tools here, and in the second part, we've really started to look at how we can start to break things down into shapes and into layers, and the differences that we can make between them, all at the same time making sure that our shapes are as simple as possible to build up our one more complicated shape here. Great, so in the next exercise, what we're going to do is we're going to be expanding on these ideas. We can have a look at objects which are not only built up of multiple objects, but also intersect with a whole host of other objects as well, and how we can start to analyze the shot and break it down into its simplest component parts. All right, but that's all looking forward to us in exercise 3. See you there.